My name is Daria Caldwell. I'm 41 years old, a recently retired lieutenant in the United States Army. 17 years of service, 4 tours. I spent more time in sand and silence than I ever did around birthday cakes or Thanksgiving tables. And yet, none of that prepared me for the moment I stepped back onto the cracked pavement of my hometown for the first time in 5 years, just to attend my grandfather's funeral. I wore my uniform, not because I wanted the attention, but because he would have wanted it. Colonel James Caldwell wasn't just my grandfather. He was a Marine through and through. When he saluted, people noticed. When he died, the family fell quiet, but not in grief. It was something else, a tightening, a bracing for what would come next. The sun hit the metal doors of the funeral home, reflecting a sharp glare as I approached. My boots, still polished, echoed softly across the concrete. Then I heard it. The voice that had been mocking me since I was 10. Well, the useless soldier finally came. Julian, my older brother, standing there like he owned the place, wearing a suit that fit too tight and a smirk even tighter. His tone was casual, but I saw the flicker of contempt behind his eyes. He raised his bourbon glass in a mock toast, like I was some war criminal being paraded through judgment. I didn't flinch, didn't speak. Years in the service had taught me that silence, when used right, could slice deeper than words. He turned back to his circle of admirers, old classmates, colleagues, people who had no idea who he really was. People who never saw him call me tin can or army charity case every time I walked into a room. Inside the chapel, everything looked just as it should. Polished pews, soft organ music, white roses. A picture of Grandpa in uniform stood beside the casket. Handsome, steady, the man I'd called every month without fail, who never once asked me to come home until the week before he died. As I stepped into the chapel, something shifted. It wasn't just the stale air or the hush that followed me. It was the people. 3 rows ahead, a man in a black suit glanced over his shoulder, just for a second. His eyes didn't linger, but his hand twitched, up toward his ear, the way someone might adjust a hidden earpiece. His posture was too stiff. The slight bulge beneath his jacket sleeve, too deliberate. I scanned the room. 2 more just like him. Well-dressed. Too still. Not mourners, observers. I took a seat in the last pew and rested my gloved hands in my lap. But inside, my stomach knotted. Something was wrong, very wrong. I didn't come home to start trouble, but the trouble was already here, and it was watching my family like a hawk. The service began. The pastor spoke gently, mentioning Grandpa's service record, his devotion to the country, and the way he always kept his boots polished, even in retirement. It was true. The man never let anything rust, not even his morals. Julian sat up front, wiping away a tear that wasn't real. I could tell by the way his eyes stayed dry and his hand moved just a second too late. Mom sat next to him, her face a mask of grief, but I'd seen that look before. It wasn't mourning, it was denial. My husband, Kyle, sat beside me, former Army intelligence, now working cybersecurity. Steady, grounded. I leaned in close and whispered under my breath, "We need to go, now." He turned to me, confused, lips parting to speak, but I was already standing. I gripped his arm and guided us down the aisle, slow, quiet, unobtrusive. Like a retreat, not a scene. We reached the car. Only then did I exhale. My hands trembled just enough to be noticeable. Kyle shut the driver's side door and looked at me. "What was that, Daria?" I looked straight ahead for a beat before turning to face him. The words came out low, measured. "You really didn't see it, did you?" He frowned. "See what?" I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my old secure device, still active, though barely legal to use in civilian life. I saw 3 men in that chapel with concealed weapons. One of them was wired. The other 2 kept hands low, body language tight. And Julian, he knew they were there. He was acting. Kyle's expression changed, from concern to calculation. "You think it's connected?" I nodded once. "It's not just a funeral. It's a cover." He started the engine. "Where do we go?" I gave him the answer I'd rehearsed since the moment I saw that first movement in the crowd. "Somewhere safe, then I make the call." 10 minutes later, I was on the phone. It took less than 30 seconds. No names, just the code. This is Lieutenant Caldwell, 17 Delta. Barton Avenue Funeral Home. Suspected reactivation of Operation Peregrine. Immediate response required. They didn't ask for more. We sat in silence, parked in a quiet lot behind a closed diner, watching the minutes tick by. Then we heard it. The sirens, 4 black SUVs, lights off, silent approach. Within moments, they surrounded the funeral home. Agents in black emerged, FBI, tactical gear, voices on radios. I didn't need to watch what happened next. I already knew. They were there for Julian, and I was the one who'd brought them. 3 months before the funeral, my phone rang in the middle of a Friday night. Grandpa wasn't one for late calls unless something was wrong. I'd just gotten back from a medical appointment, routine post-retirement checkup, and was still sitting in my car in the driveway, watching condensation slide down the windshield. The screen read, James Caldwell. I answered quickly, bracing myself. Grandpa? There was a pause, like he was checking to make sure the line was secure. Or maybe that he was really ready to speak. Then his voice came through, not panicked, but cautious, low. Daria, there's something you need to know. It's Julian. My heart clenched. What about him? He's not who you think he is, I sighed, resting my head against the steering wheel. This wasn't the first time Grandpa had raised concerns about Julian. He and my brother had been at odds for years, mostly about money, sometimes about politics, but often about values. Still, it had always felt like the typical generational rift. Until now. Grandpa, did he borrow money again? But his next word stopped me cold. There's something going on. Something's being reactivated. His voice faltered, not because he was unsure, but because he was choosing his words carefully. Do you remember Operation Peregrine? I sat up straight. Barely. That's Cold War stuff. You said it was shut down before I was even in high school. It was, or it was supposed to be. Another long pause, then slowly. They're meeting again, quietly, under the radar. Barton, 2 weeks ago. I blinked. Barton? That's our family church. I thought that place hadn't hosted anything since. Exactly. The line crackled a little. I could hear him shifting in his chair. Daria, if something happens to me, don't say that. You'll know where to look. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The Caldwell family wasn't just military. We were intelligence. Discreet legacies, hidden service. Grandpa had trained agents before most people knew the alphabet agencies existed. Are you in danger? I asked carefully. A small laugh escaped him, but it sounded hollow. At my age, everything's dangerous. But yes, if Julian is involved, then this is bigger than resentment, bigger than money. He stopped speaking for a long while. I thought maybe the call had dropped. But then he added, There are files in the workshop, but I've made backups, just in case. I stared into the dark. Why are you telling me this now? Because you're the only one I trust. I didn't know what to say to that. I hadn't been home in years, barely visited. Not because I didn't care, but because the weight of everything back there, it just never lifted. You're still the only one who listens before reacting, he continued. That's why you made a good soldier. That's why you'll make a better witness. I sat in silence, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his words. Should I come home? I finally asked. No, not yet. It's not safe. That word chilled me. Safe. He never used it lightly. Just promise me something, he said. Anything. If the signal comes, if anything strange happens, you don't confront it head on. You observe, you wait, and then you act. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. I will. He hesitated once more, then offered a quiet closing line that I didn't understand at the time. There's more honor in knowing when to watch than when to charge. He hung up. The next day, I told Kyle. He said it sounded like paranoia, maybe even the early signs of dementia. I considered it too. Grandpa was almost 90, but his voice that night wasn't confused. It was calculated, focused. A whisper behind enemy lines, not a ramble from a rocking chair. And just 1 week later, I got the call that he'd died, peacefully, in his sleep. No autopsy requested. That alone raised questions. He'd been active, sharp, still working on his own home repairs. And yet, no warning signs, no illness, no goodbye. I asked for the medical report. There was nothing suspicious on paper, just natural causes. Heart failure, but he had always passed his physicals, never smoked, drank only black coffee and oat milk. And in our last call, he was planning to replace the roof. It didn't add up. Still, I kept it to myself. Maybe I didn't want to believe it. Maybe I thought grief was coloring my judgment. So I buried the memory of that call, shoved it down deep, until the day of the funeral when I walked into that chapel and saw 3 men who didn't belong. And then I remembered every word he'd said. If something happens to me, you'll know where to look. 3 days before the funeral, I landed in Georgia. The air was humid, the sky a dull gray, like it was holding its breath. The drive from the airport to my mother's house was short, but the silence in the car with Kyle felt longer than it needed to be. He didn't ask why I was clutching Grandpa's dog tags in my pocket. He didn't need to. We pulled into the driveway just past 2 p.m. The front lawn hadn't been mowed in weeks. Grandpa would have hated that. He used to trim every edge with military precision, even after retirement. Now the place looked like it was waiting to be forgotten. Mom opened the door before we knocked. She didn't hug me. She didn't smile. She just said, "You're staying in your old room. Don't leave dishes in the sink." It was always like that with her. Practical to a fault. Emotion? Optional. Julian wasn't home, or so I was told. "He's been handling the arrangements," Mom said over a cup of instant coffee that tasted like cardboard. "He's busy." I didn't argue, but I knew Julian. If he wasn't here to gloat, it was because he didn't want to see me until he had the upper hand. That, or he was hiding something. That night, while Kyle helped sort boxes in the living room, I slipped out back. The small garage behind the house had once been Grandpa's sanctuary. He'd worked on everything there. Old radios, army footlockers, maps from 100 places I could barely pronounce. The door was locked, but he'd always kept the spare key behind a false brick near the window. Still there. Inside, everything smelled the same. Old paper, engine oil, dust, and cedar. But something was off. A stack of drawers near the wall had been left half open, like someone was in a hurry. The pegboard where Grandpa used to hang his tools had missing outlines. 3 sockets gone. A wire cutter, too. In the corner sat a tall gun safe, disguised like a tool chest. I'd seen him use it once when I was 17. He made me turn around when he typed in the passcode, but what he didn't realize then was that I'd memorized the sound pattern of the keypad. 4 tones, twice, then silence. I tapped in the code. The safe clicked open. But it wasn't what I expected. Not even close. Inside were no weapons, just folders. Dozens of them. Old military records. Copies of declassified missions. Some in better shape than others. I pulled one labeled Malta Ops, 1979. Yellowed paper, ink slightly faded. I reached for another, but then I saw it. A manila folder with the corner torn, stuffed in backward, like someone had jammed it in at the last minute. On the front, scrawled in blue ink, were the words, Project Peregrine, 1987. My blood ran cold. That name again. The same name Grandpa had whispered to me on the phone. The same operation he said was being reactivated. I opened the folder carefully, expecting to find classified diagrams, maps, maybe encrypted notes. But all I found were photocopies. Dozens of pages, all stamped as copies. No official seals, no signatures, no chain of custody. Someone had replaced the originals, and sloppily. A page was misaligned, part of the text cut off. Another page was upside down. Grandpa would have never allowed this. I searched the rest of the safe. Nothing. The originals were gone. I sat back on my heels, staring at the folder, trying to make sense of what I'd just found. Was this what he meant? Was this the backup he'd warned me about? Or what was left of it? Had someone already been here before me? I closed the safe and stood up. That's when I noticed the faint scuff marks near the workbench. Boot prints, not Grandpa's. Someone else had been inside, recently. I snapped a photo of the folder, tucked it into my backpack, and left the garage as quietly as I'd entered. Back in the house, Mom was asleep in her recliner. Kyle had dozed off on the couch. I stood there for a moment, looking around. Everything looked normal, quiet, domestic. But I knew something now that none of them did. Someone had been looking for what Grandpa hid, and I had just found the hole they left behind. Later that night, I opened my laptop, logged into an old encrypted cloud I hadn't touched since deployment, and uploaded every image of that file, just in case. Because if Project Peregrine really was being resurrected, then the funeral wasn't going to be the only thing they tried to bury. By late afternoon, the chapel had emptied, but the house was filling. The Caldwell home always did feel smaller when people came pretending to care. Faces I hadn't seen in years gathered around the living room and the kitchen. Neighbors, old church ladies, people who couldn't remember if Grandpa had served in the Navy or the Marines. But Julian held court in the center of it all, like a damn politician. He wore black like it was a costume. The Rolex on his wrist caught the light with every exaggerated gesture. In one hand, he held a tumbler of whiskey, Grandpa's favorite. With the other, he poured for anyone within reach, smiling like this was a launch party instead of a funeral. "You know," he said loudly, raising his glass, "I'll never forget the story Grandpa told me about his time in Panama. The jungle, the humidity, that one lieutenant who couldn't stomach goat stew. That was real combat, real grit." I froze mid-step, my spine stiffening. Panama. My eyes darted across the room. No one else reacted. Most were nodding politely, maybe chuckling. Someone muttered, "Classic Jim," as if the tale had been told 100 times, but it hadn't, because it never had. Grandpa never spoke about Panama, not to anyone, except me, and certainly not about the goat stew. That wasn't a joke. It was a coded reference, one he used only once, during that final call. A phrase tied to Operation Peregrine. Goat stew, he'd said, was how we spotted insiders. If they brought it up, we knew they'd read the wrong files. I moved closer, standing near the edge of the room. Julian noticed me but didn't flinch. He continued. "And the mission they ran, Peregrine? Oh man. Grandpa said it was the reason the Soviets backed off the Caribbean." Someone whistled low. "Peregrine? That was Cold War, right?" Julian chuckled. "Not officially, of course. You won't find it in any files. But yeah, he trusted me with that one. That was a lie. All of it. Every word." I stared at him, not blinking. He wasn't just repeating old family myths. He was testing, signaling, using classified references, stories Grandpa deliberately shielded. He was seeing who would react, who might know what he'd taken. It was sloppy and intentional. A woman next to him, curvy, dark-haired, vaguely familiar, laughed and touched his arm. "You always make everything sound like a movie," she said. Julian turned to her, voice softer, almost smug. "Truth's stranger than fiction when you grow up in the right family." I took a step back, my fingers clenched. Kyle found me by the hallway, holding 2 glasses of water. "You look like you're about to knock him out." "I should," I muttered. "He's quoting files he never read." Kyle handed me a glass. "You sure he didn't see them before you arrived?" I shook my head. Even if he found them, he wouldn't know what those references meant unless someone explained it to him. That means someone else is involved. Kyle's brow furrowed. "You think he's baiting you?" he asked. I nodded. "And others. That whole goat stew thing? That's a code. Grandpa set it up. Julian's either stupid enough to repeat it, or smart enough to know it's bait." I watched Julian raise his glass again. "To James Caldwell, a real American, a man who kept secrets and built a legacy." I felt bile rise in my throat. He wasn't toasting Grandpa. He was staking a claim. The woman beside him handed him another file folder. No one seemed to notice, and I caught a glimpse of the label, property titles, Caldwell Estate. Julian didn't break stride, just tucked it under his arm and kept grinning. That's when I knew. He wasn't just throwing a wake. He was hosting a transfer, a power shift. A message to those watching, those men from the funeral, probably still nearby, that he was in control now. That he held the legacy, the keys, the knowledge. But he didn't. Because I had taken the real Peregrine file. And what he didn't know was that I'd already moved it out of state, encrypted it 3 ways, and buried the original in a server cluster with federal oversight. He had no idea what kind of war he'd just declared. But he would. Soon. I watched Julian closely from the kitchen doorway. He stood beside the fireplace, brandy glass in hand, commanding the room like a politician who'd just outlived his scandal. His words were smooth, animated, his posture casual, but it was his hand that betrayed him. His index finger trembled. Barely. Maybe no one else would notice, but I did. Because I'd seen it before, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Berlin. Fresh boots on their first patrol. Veterans sitting in silence before a mission they knew could go wrong. That kind of shake doesn't come from grief or cold. It comes from fear. Only Julian had never set foot on a battlefield. Not even boot camp. He'd failed ROTC in college and called it an act of rebellion. So what the hell was he afraid of? I turned to Kyle, who was scanning the room from beside me. His expression was unreadable, but I could tell he was processing, connecting dots. I leaned in. "Do you remember the last time Grandpa called us?" I whispered. "The video chat? A couple weeks before?" Kyle frowned. "Yeah, he was in the garage. Said he'd fix the antenna himself." "Did anything strike you as strange about that call?" He paused, eyes narrowing. "I don't know. He seemed tired. Looked like he'd lost weight." "But his voice?" I asked. "His eyes?" Kyle exhaled slowly. "Now that you mention it, yeah. There was a moment when you got up to grab something, and he went quiet. Just stared into the camera. My heart beat faster. Exactly. He didn't blink for a full 10 seconds. Just looked right at us. I thought the screen froze. It didn't, I said. He was watching us, not the screen. Us. We stood there, surrounded by small talk and laughter and the clinking of glasses. Yet all I could hear was the silence of that moment. Grandpa's gaze during that call hadn't been blank or tired. It had been deliberate, intense. And now, standing in the middle of the room, my brother was fidgeting like someone waiting for a verdict. Julian took another sip, hand shaking slightly, and set the glass down too fast. The rim clinked against the table. The woman next to him, same one from earlier, smiled and placed her hand on his forearm to steady it. Kyle followed my eyes. "You think he's scared of being exposed?" I nodded. "He's not in control, not entirely. He's trying to act like he is. But that tremor, that's instinct. That's someone who knows eyes are on him." Kyle's brow furrowed. "The FBI?" "Maybe," I whispered. "Or someone else. If Grandpa was right about Project Peregrine, Julian might be dealing with people far beyond our usual agencies." A memory tugged at me. Something Grandpa once said during a training debrief years ago. "There are some doors, Daria, you don't knock on unless you're ready to be dragged in." That look on his face during the video call. It wasn't resignation, it was warning. He knew. He knew someone had found something. And if Julian had touched those files, if he had reached out to the wrong people thinking he could sell, trade, or leverage. I stared at my brother as he raised his glass again. This time to a story about how Grandpa once escaped a Havana checkpoint using only a smile and a cigar. Another fabrication, but his voice cracked slightly at the end of the sentence, barely noticeable, just enough. That's when it hit me. He wasn't drunk. He was unraveling. I turned back to Kyle. He's not just scared. He's spiraling. Kyle's jaw tensed. "So what do we do?" I stared across the room, past the guests, past the decorations and faux patriotism hung on the wall for effect. I focused on the man pretending to carry Grandpa's legacy, whose finger couldn't stop shaking. "We wait," I said, "and we watch." Kyle nodded once, then I added, almost under my breath, "And when the moment's right, I'll make the next call." It was late spring the last time I saw Grandpa in person. I'd just finished a 6-month rotation assisting with veteran reintegration in Colorado and swung by Georgia unannounced. He was in the backyard, sanding down an old cedar bench like it was a sacred ritual. When he saw me, he didn't smile, not right away. He just nodded. "Still know how to show up without calling," he grumbled, though his eyes softened. "I figured it's in the blood," I said. He didn't ask why I came. He never did. We didn't talk much that day. We didn't have to. We sat in silence for nearly an hour, listening to cicadas, letting the wind move the trees for us. When I stood up to leave, he walked inside without a word and returned with something clutched in his hand. A key ring, 6 keys, all dull brass, each one filed down at different angles, edges worn like they'd been tested repeatedly. He didn't say anything, just pressed them into my palm. I raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" Still no answer. He simply looked at me, then down at my uniform. I slipped the ring into the inside pocket of my service jacket and gave him a crisp, almost joking salute. He didn't return it, but he did smile. A small one. Like he knew that was the last time we'd stand on the same patch of dirt. That was 9 months ago. I hadn't thought about those keys in months, not until that moment, standing in his bedroom again after the funeral, surrounded by memories packed in cardboard. The uniform jacket was hanging in my closet at Mom's house. I retrieved it, dug into the lining. There it was. Same brass ring, same 6 keys. And now, I finally knew what to do with them. His bedroom hadn't changed in decades. The same World War II pilot photo hung above his bed. His father. The bookshelf still held The Art of War with worn margins and annotations in red pen. I pulled the desk drawers one by one, testing each key, listening for clicks. 5 keys didn't fit anything. The 6th fit like it had lived there. The lock was hidden beneath the bottom drawer, buried under a false panel. The kind of detail only someone trained in intelligence would think to check. It took pressure at just the right angle before the mechanism gave way with a soft pop. The hidden compartment wasn't big, just deep enough for a folder, a few envelopes, and an old zip drive. Inside, I found a scanned document. Faded, time-stamped from a military base I didn't recognize. Across the top, Project Peregrine, active contact file, revised, Jan, 1994. My stomach dropped. Below that was a roster, about 20 names, some with clearance levels, others with mission code names. Most were scratched out in pen. One by one, I read each entry. Some were familiar, former officers, analysts, a few foreign intelligence assets I remembered from Grandpa's stories. But 2 names near the bottom were unmarked. One was illegible. The other read, Julian Caldwell, Tier 3 support, unconfirmed. I froze. Tier 3, support role, port. That didn't imply leadership, it implied access, assistance, facilitation. In a covert op, support often handled off-the-books logistics, communications, transport, and in some cases, laundering data or resources. It was the level where plausible deniability lived. Julian's name wasn't just a coincidence, he was listed. Next to his name, in Grandpa's handwriting, was a note. Approached in 2006. Potential breach 2021. Monitor. Monitor. That's what Grandpa had been doing all these years. Watching Julian. Not confronting him. Waiting. There was more. A manila envelope contained a printed list titled Handshake Contacts. It was a network of Cold War-era informants and sleeper liaisons. Most names were now dead, but a few addresses had Georgia zip codes. And tucked behind it all, wrapped in black electrical tape, was a single note in Grandpa's handwriting. If you find this, he knows you're close. Don't stop. Don't trust local law. Use the call sign, Black Birch. I stepped back, feeling my lungs tighten. Grandpa didn't trust the system anymore. Not the military, not the VA, not even the FBI directly. He'd built his own back channel, knowing this might happen, knowing I might be the one to finish what he started. I held the keys in my hand again, feeling the cool weight of brass and memory. This wasn't just about legacy. It was about infiltration, betrayal, family. And the man standing in our living room, drinking brandy and telling war stories he never earned, had once been tagged a potential breach by a decorated Marine colonel, my brother, the one I'd shared a sandbox with, the one who had just made himself the center of something deadly. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I closed the drawer, and I started making a plan. I stepped out of the house through the back, avoiding the gaze of distant cousins and old family friends. The air had turned sharp, the sky smeared in dull gray. Georgia humidity had finally given way to the kind of cold that made your breath visible, and every decision sharper. Kyle was already by the car, leaning on the passenger door with a look that said he knew what I was about to do. "You sure?" he asked softly. I didn't answer. I opened the driver's side, sat down, and reached into the glove compartment where I kept the emergency sat phone. This wasn't just a regular line. It was a secure satellite uplink, coded point-to-point, untraceable consumer networks, issued to me when I consulted on a multi-agency cyber case 3 years ago. only supposed to be used in case of direct national security threat. I'd never even touched the thing, but now I powered it up. The boot screen blinked twice, then prompted the multi-code handshake. I keyed in my old clearance, Lator Daria Caldwell, confirming access, code 17 Delta. The encryption took a few seconds, then rolled into a live channel. A woman's voice answered, calm, clipped, trained. FBI critical intake, secure line, identify and proceed. I took a breath, felt my spine straighten like it did in formation. This is Lieutenant Daria Caldwell, U.S. Air Force, retired. Security Advisor ID 04371 Baker. Pause. I am invoking Code 17 Delta. I confirm visual and documentary evidence of a reactivated Cold War intelligence trade structure, Operation Peregrine. I repeat, Peregrine is live. The line crackled for a second, then silence. The woman returned, her voice slightly more alert. Code 17 Delta acknowledged. Do you have the originating material in hand? Yes. I recovered encrypted documents from a deceased Marine Colonel, James Caldwell, referencing active informants and compromised channels. I have reason to believe the network is being manipulated by a civilian asset embedded in his family. There was another pause, then typing. Do you believe this asset is aware of your knowledge? Yes, I said quietly. He knows, and he's nervous. What is the asset's name? Julian Caldwell, my brother. Saying it out loud felt like swallowing broken glass. Understood, she said. Are you in a safe location? Not yet. I'm at the funeral reception. Civilian presence high. Local law enforcement insufficient. I don't trust them. Do you request tactical or forensic assistance? I hesitated for just a beat. Tactical. If I'm right, he's not acting alone. There are at least 3 unknown individuals at this event who move like former operators, watching exits, communicating discreetly. Understood. Give us a 10-minute window. Geolocation initiated. Do not engage. Can you secure the documents off-site? I already have a decoy file on premises. Originals are off-site, encrypted, double-key access. A longer pause now. Lieutenant Caldwell, based on your clearance and history, you are authorized for continued observation under Shadow Protocol 6. Do not escalate. Will confirm inbound agents under call sign, Black Birch. I froze. Black Birch. Grandpa's phrase. They knew. They knew this wasn't just a revival of some old case. They had been watching too, waiting. Grandpa must have flagged something years ago, maybe through a back door, and they had kept him looped into the deep channels. I stared at the steering wheel. My pulse slowed. Copy, I said. 10-minute window. Confirmed. End call in 5 seconds. Maintain perimeter. We'll find you. The line dropped. I sat there in the car for a few long moments, letting the silence wrap around me like a second skin. Kyle knocked gently on the window, then opened the door. Well, he asked. They're coming, I said, looking straight ahead. He nodded. So what now? I finally looked at him, eyes clear. Now we let the funeral finish. We let Julian believe he's won. And then, Kyle asked. I tightened my grip on the sat phone. And then we give the ghosts their say. 10 minutes felt like an hour. Kyle and I sat in the car parked just across from the main entrance to the funeral home. I kept the sat phone in my lap, my fingers tapping it gently like it might still be listening. My eyes didn't move from the door. Then I saw them. A black SUV pulled up without sirens. No lights, no noise. Sleek. Government issued, armored without looking it. 4 agents stepped out, dressed in suits with bulletproof vests, barely visible beneath. 2 of them moved toward the side entrance. 1 carried a slim black case. The 4th pulled out a badge and clipped it to his front. Federal Agent, DOJ Task Force. No hesitation, they moved like people who'd rehearsed this 100 times. From where I sat, I had a perfect view of the front glass panels. Inside, the room was still full of low conversation and fake smiles. Julian stood near the framed portrait of Grandpa, holding a whiskey tumbler and grinning at some second cousin I didn't recognize. I didn't need to see inside to know what would happen next, but Kyle did. He turned toward me, his fingers gripping the steering wheel though he wasn't driving. Daria, he said carefully, are you absolutely sure about what you saw? About what this is? I didn't turn to him yet. My eyes were still on the SUV, on the agents stepping through the front door. One of them touched his earpiece, coordinating. Finally, I looked at Kyle. "I'm not just sure," I said. "I've lived through it." He didn't speak, so I kept going. 17 years of watching how networks hide in plain sight, seeing how people pass off secrets as harmless favors. I've seen what happens when men like Julian get just enough information to be dangerous, but not enough discipline to understand what it means. Kyle's jaw clenched, his eyes dark with worry. "And what if you're wrong?" "I'd rather be wrong and alive," I said flatly, then silent and sorry. He exhaled. Through the glass doors, the first agent reached the podium where Julian had been giving his little speech earlier. There was no scene, no shouting, just calm discussion. The kind that makes people freeze because they don't understand what's happening, but know it's serious. I saw Julian stiffen. He tried to maintain composure, smiling faintly as he gestured toward the guest book table. But then his hand went to his pocket. I knew that movement, not reaching for a weapon, reaching to destroy something. "Don't do it, Julian," I whispered. One of the agents stepped closer, and I saw another gesture from the man near the side exit. In under 5 seconds, the room shifted. Not panic, yet. Just confusion. Guests moving back, chairs scraping, someone dropped a glass. Julian raised his hands like he was trying to diffuse the tension, but I saw it, the flicker in his eyes. He wasn't surprised. He was prepared for this. I felt Kyle shift beside me. "Why aren't you going in?" he asked quietly. "Because I'm not the one they need to see right now." "I don't understand," he said. "You started this." "No," I corrected him. "Julian did. I just made sure someone finally listened." The agents surrounded Julian now, their formation tight. One took the glass from his hand. Another began speaking to the crowd, something about a federal investigation. Guests were being calmly escorted out the side. I noticed the woman from earlier, the one who had been glued to Julian's arm, pulling out her phone. One of the agents saw her, a brief exchange. The phone disappeared into a Ziploc bag. I felt a sharp pang in my chest. She wasn't just a date. She was part of it. I looked down at my lap, at my hands. They weren't shaking, not anymore. Kyle broke the silence again. "Did he ever have a chance," he asked, "to do the right thing?" I turned to face him. "He had 17 years, I said. "Same amount I gave the country. He used his time for leverage. I used mine for duty." A beat passed. Then quietly, Kyle said, "I still don't know if this will fix anything." "It won't," I replied. "But it stops it from getting worse." I turned back toward the building. The doors were opening now. Julian was being led out, head down. No cuffs yet, but that was protocol for high-clearance suspects. He wasn't resisting, but his eyes scanned the parking lot. And when they landed on our car, I knew he saw me. I didn't look away, neither did he. As the agents led Julian out through the funeral home doors, the crowd parted like oil in water. No one knew how to react. Some stepped back instinctively. Others froze in place with half-sipped drinks in their hands. My mother stood near the casket, her hands clasped in front of her like she was still saying a prayer that no one heard. Julian wasn't in cuffs, not yet, but the message was clear. The agents didn't need to make a show of force, just presence, and it worked. Silence fell over the room like snow on glass. Kyle and I stepped out of the car and crossed the parking lot. Not fast, not dramatic. Just enough for people to register that I wasn't just a guest. When we stepped through the doors, I saw her, my mother. She turned. Her eyes widened the moment she saw me. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. The room had already done the talking. Her gaze drifted past me to the door where Julian had disappeared. Then it came back to me, and that look, that wounded confusion, cut through me sharper than any bullet I'd ever dodged in the field. I walked up to her. She didn't flinch, but she didn't move forward either. Her arms stayed pressed close to her sides, like she was holding something inside. Maybe 100 questions, maybe none. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice trembling, not with rage, but something more fragile. I stood still, calm. "I didn't turn against this family," I said clearly. "I turned against a traitor." Whispers stirred behind us, but I didn't turn around. The room faded into blur. All that existed now was this moment. Me, her, the weight between us. She blinked, and for a second, her whole face collapsed inward. Not in grief, not even in denial. Just confusion, like a woman whose compass had suddenly stopped pointing north. Your brother, she whispered. No, I corrected her softly. Your son. My brother died a long time ago, Mom. You just didn't want to see it. Her breath caught. She opened her mouth to speak again, but I raised a hand, not rudely, just gently enough to hold the space. I didn't do this to hurt you, I said. But Grandpa tried to warn us. He left signs. You saw the way he kept Julian at a distance in his last years. You heard the things he wouldn't say out loud. I just followed the breadcrumbs he left behind. She looked away then, toward the casket. I thought we were done with secrets when your father died, she said quietly. So did I. We stood in silence for a long beat. Then she asked, Why now? Why today? I glanced around, because I had to wait for him to show his hand. He got cocky, started referencing things only Grandpa and I knew. Peregrine, Panama. Those weren't just war stories. They were red flags. I couldn't ignore them anymore. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She was a soldier's wife, after all. I raised 2 children, she said, voice soft. One was a ghost. The other became a stranger. I flinched, just a little, then said, Maybe that's true, but only one of us was willing to be seen for what we really were. I turned then, prepared to leave her in the stillness of her thoughts, but she spoke again, just as I reached the foyer. Did he sell things? She asked. Classified. I paused. I don't know yet, I said honestly. But whatever it was enough to make 4 federal agents come to Grandpa's funeral. That silence again. Her shoulders sagged. You should go, she murmured. I nodded. Not out of defiance, just acknowledgement. Respect for the wreckage. As Kyle and I exited through the double doors, I felt the hush behind us ripple again, like the echo of something too big to be named. I didn't look back. Outside, the sun had started to break through the clouds. Thin shafts of light reached across the lawn, casting long shadows over the graves. Kyle slipped his hand into mine. Neither of us said anything. Some truths didn't need repeating. That night, the air in the house was heavy with something more than grief. It was judgment, thick, unspoken, and poisonous. Mom called me into the kitchen like she used to when I was 16 and caught breaking curfew. Same voice, same chair. But the stakes were higher now. She sat with a mug of coffee in her hand. Though it had long gone cold, she hadn't touched it. Her eyes were fixed on a spot on the wall behind me, like, maybe if she looked hard enough, it would all make sense. I stood in the doorway for a moment before walking in. The hardwood floor creaked like it remembered our old fights. I sat down across from her, folding my hands in my lap. She didn't speak for a while, just stared. Then finally, Why'd you do it, Daria? Not angry, just hollow. I met her eyes. Because I had to. Her brow furrowed. You didn't. You could have come to us, to me. We could have figured it out together. I kept my tone calm, measured. Figured out what? That Julian's been lying for years? That he's been feeding things to people we don't even know? That he walked into a funeral with a micro recorder in his shoe and enough false stories to make himself look like a war hero? She winced. I leaned in. Grandpa warned me, Mom, in his own way. He left pieces for me to find. I chose to listen. Her voice cracked. But he was your brother. I didn't flinch. No, he was your son. My brother died when he sold his loyalty for leverage. She looked away, her fingers tightening around the coffee mug. You embarrassed us, she whispered. I protected us, I corrected. You just haven't realized it yet. She shook her head. I don't recognize you anymore. I gave a soft laugh, not bitter, just tired. I've been the same all along. I just stopped apologizing for it. Silence again. Then she asked, barely audible, Would you do it again? I looked her straight in the eyes. In a heartbeat. She stood slowly, moved toward the sink. Her shoulders slumped in a way I hadn't seen since Dad's funeral. And just before she turned away, I said it. I didn't choose blood. I chose Grandpa. I chose honor. Blood can betray you. Honor doesn't. She didn't respond. Just stood there, staring out the window into the dark backyard, where the porch light flickered against the night. I rose and walked to the hallway, Passing by the family photos on the wall, Julian's graduation, my basic training ceremony, our last Thanksgiving together. One frame was missing, the photo of Grandpa in uniform. I paused, then walked on. Behind me, the silence held. Heavy, like the kind that follows a fire, when the structure's still standing, but the heat has hollowed everything out. The next morning, she knocked on my bedroom door like she had something to say she'd rehearsed all night. Her knock wasn't gentle. It was tight, restrained, like she'd held back a storm and wasn't sure if she still should. I opened the door. She didn't wait to be invited in. She walked past me, arms crossed, the smell of stale perfume trailing her, same one she wore when Dad was still alive. She stood in the center of the room, avoiding eye contact. "You didn't have to humiliate us," she said. I didn't move. "You didn't have to ruin your brother's life," she added, sharper now. "You could have come to me, talked to me, not the feds." I held her gaze. "And what would you have done, Mom? What would you have said if I told you Julian was trading classified military records for cryptocurrency?" She flinched. "That's not, isn't it?" I cut her off. I walked to the nightstand and pulled out my encrypted tablet, tapped it open, found the file. I downloaded it after retrieving it from the drive Julian tried to burn, sloppy. I decrypted it with a key he didn't know Grandpa left behind. Then I hit play. Julian's voice filled the air, arrogant, smooth. "They want scans with seal stamps. Originals aren't necessary. I already replaced the seal files. Transfer's been made, wallets confirmed. 17,000 in the first batch. Once I upload the Vietnam files, it's another 30. I paused it. Her face had gone pale. "I didn't want to hear it either," I said. She stared at the floor, then the wall. "Anywhere but me." "I don't believe it," she whispered. "He wouldn't." "He did," I said. "And I have 4 more audio files, plus the metadata showing his logins, and the VPN route through Turkey." She sat down on the edge of the bed like her knees had given out. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, quietly, the sound I hadn't heard in years, my mother crying, not loud, not dramatic. Just silent tears sliding down her cheek while she stared at the floor. She raised a trembling hand to her mouth, like the truth had finally found a way in and was too sharp to hold. I walked over, sat beside her, didn't touch her, just sat. She finally said, "I thought I raised him better than this." I answered without anger. "You did. He just made a different choice." She wiped her face with her sleeve, breathing hard. "Will they charge him?" "Yes." "For how long?" "I don't know." She turned to me. Her eyes were bloodshot, but steady now. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you weren't ready to hear it." A long pause. Then she whispered, "I'm not sure I'm ready now." I nodded. "Me neither." It was raining when David showed up. I hadn't seen him in almost 12 years, not since Grandpa's retirement ceremony. He looked older, but not weaker. The kind of man who wore history on his face like medals on a uniform. He waited on the porch, his coat soaked through, holding a folder wrapped in plastic like it was something sacred. When I opened the door, he nodded once. "I figured you'd be the only one left who'd want the truth," he said. I stepped aside. David didn't speak until he sat down at the kitchen table. He declined coffee, just placed the folder on the table, and kept his hands resting gently on it, like it had a pulse. "I served with your grandfather in 1987, he began. We were both attached to the Peregrine unit, Black Ops intel sharing in the late Cold War years. Surveillance, trade routes, data intercepts, Cold War cleanup. Mostly classified fieldwork." I nodded. "Correct." "I've read the dry version," he gave a thin smile. "Then let me tell you the version they don't print." He opened the folder. Inside were yellowed documents, handwritten maps, even a faded photograph of 6 men in uniform, Grandpa in the center. David tapped the photo. "Back then, we were told there was a breach. Someone was leaking internal movements to Warsaw Pact allies through a backdoor network. Stuff that could get people killed. The program shut down overnight, but we never found the mole." He paused. "Until now." I leaned forward. David continued, voice softer now. "Your grandfather suspected someone inside the unit, but we were never able to trace it. No fingerprints, no direct transmission logs. Whoever it was, they were smart. Covered their tracks. Burned the trail." My stomach tightened. "Was Julian even born then?" David nodded solemnly. "Yes. And he wasn't involved then, but we think someone passed him the access later, maybe through inheritance, maybe through digital remnants your grandfather left behind, not knowing it would be exploited. He looked me dead in the eye. You found something he didn't mean for Julian to find, didn't you? I hesitated. Then gave a slow nod. A hidden drive. Encrypted archives. Keys embedded in personal letters. David exhaled. Then it tracks, that breach. It never ended. It just changed hands. Your brother picked up the chain where someone else dropped it. Maybe to make money, maybe for leverage, but he knew exactly what he was handling. I leaned back, my voice a whisper. Why didn't you come forward sooner? He looked away, jaw tight. Because silence was easier. Until I saw what you did. At the funeral, that took guts. A pause passed between us. I owed him more than silence, I said. David nodded slowly. You gave him justice, even if it came late. I reached for the folder, held it like a truth finally unearthed. Outside, the rain had stopped, but inside, the storm was still working its way out. The letter was folded into a book I'd almost left behind. A dog-eared copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, Grandpa's favorite. He used to quote it to me when I was 13 and thought the world owed me understanding. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. He said it like it was gospel. I'd taken the book from his desk out of instinct, not expecting anything inside. But when I sat on the edge of the motel bed that night, something felt off. The spine was too stiff near the back. I opened it and found the envelope tucked inside. No address, no stamp. Just my name in his handwriting. Daria. I stared at it for a moment before tearing it open. The paper was creased, the ink slightly smudged at the corners, like he'd folded it, unfolded it, thought twice, and then decided to leave it behind. His handwriting was clean, direct. Daria, if you're reading this, I probably didn't get the chance to say what I should have said years ago. You were always the quiet one, the one who listened before she spoke. That's why I trusted you. Trusted you to know the difference between silence and cowardice. There are things I've done in uniform that I don't expect applause for. Some I've tried to forget. Others I've locked away until I realized locking them away was just inviting someone else to find them. If one day the truth brings you pain, remember, a soldier doesn't fight for applause. He doesn't stand for cheers. He stands because it's the right thing to do. And sometimes the only way to honor that is to stand alone. I'm sorry you may have to, but I've never doubted that if anyone could, it would be you. Grandpa. I read it twice, then a third time. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to, but because the letter didn't ask for tears. It asked for clarity, resolve. He hadn't written this for comfort. He'd written it to give me a compass, to remind me that pain didn't mean I'd made the wrong choice. It just meant I hadn't run from the right one. I folded the letter and placed it back in the book, then held it to my chest. Kyle knocked softly on the door behind me. You okay? He asked. I nodded, still facing the wall. Yeah, I said. I just finally heard what I needed to hear. In that silence, I understood truth rarely comes with comfort. But sometimes it comes with legacy, and that's enough. The courtroom smelled like old paper and something colder, something permanent. Julian sat 2 rows ahead, flanked by his lawyer and a federal marshal. He wore a simple gray suit. No handcuffs in view, but the weight of them was there. Not on his wrists, on his face. The room was packed, veterans, former colleagues of my grandfather, 2 agents from the FBI's counterintelligence division. Even David was there, sitting near the back, hands folded, jaw clenched. The judge read the sentence slowly. 32 months in federal prison, followed by probation. They had enough for conviction, but not enough for treason. Not without pulling decades of dormant skeletons from closets no one dared open. But I knew better. This wasn't about numbers. It was about names. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Julian stood. He didn't look at the judge, or at our mother, who sat stone still, her fingers interlaced tight on her lap like she was praying to someone who stopped answering years ago. He looked at me. For a moment, I braced myself for blame, for venom, for some petty attempt to rewrite history in front of strangers. But his voice was low, steady. You were right. Silence spread like a ripple through the room. He continued, eyes never leaving mine. Grandpa chose you. Not because you were a soldier, not because you outranked me, but because you didn't stay silent. A hush fell over the room. He swallowed. I wanted legacy, but I wasn't willing to earn it. You carried it, and I tried to erase it. I didn't move, I didn't speak. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he added. I just wanted to say it out loud, while I still had a name. Then he sat down. The gavel came down. The moment ended. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited like vultures. I walked past them. Kyle shielded me from the noise, but I wasn't running from it. I had something louder inside me now. The truth. It wasn't the victory I imagined. No applause, no vindication. Just the cold air of a courthouse morning and the quiet weight of something that felt finished. Not healed, not erased, just finished. And maybe that was enough. Because justice, when it works, doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like silence, the kind that doesn't haunt you anymore. 3 weeks later, I stood at the edge of the old barracks, now renovated into a leadership academy for newly commissioned officers. The floors smelled like waxed wood and fresh linen. The walls still carried the voices of those who passed through before us, when we were younger and louder and hadn't learned yet how silence sometimes says the most. I had been invited to speak to the graduating class. They asked for a speech on integrity. I brought only a folded note from my grandfather and the chain with my dog tags. Nothing more. At the end of my talk, a cadet raised his hand. Barely 20. Green eyes, straight back, but something unsure in his voice. Ma'am, if you had to choose again between honoring the truth or protecting your family, would you still choose what you did? The room quieted. All eyes on me. No air conditioning hum, no fidgeting, just wait. I looked him in the eye and said, I didn't choose to abandon my family. I chose not to let my family abandon honor. Somewhere near the back, someone inhaled sharply. Maybe it was just the air settling, or maybe they understood. Because that's what truth feels like when it lands. Not loud, just real. When the session ended, I lingered at the edge of the parade grounds, watching the sunlight cut clean lines between the flagpoles. Kyle waited in the car. He didn't rush me. Before we go, I want to leave something with you. Maybe you're watching this on a quiet morning, coffee in hand. Or maybe it's the middle of the night, and stories like this are the only thing keeping your thoughts company. Wherever you are, thank you. We read every comment you leave, and we carry your stories too. If this one touched your heart, consider subscribing. Not just for more stories like mine, but to be part of a community that still believes in second chances, in healing, and in the quiet kind of strength. Because sometimes miracles don't knock loudly. Sometimes they wait patiently until you're ready to let them in. Take care of yourself. Hold tight to what's right. And wherever life takes you, carry this story with you. We'll see you in the next one.